You are listening to the Outside the Boards podcast. I'm Danny O'Leary. For most of my professional career, I have worked in mainstream sports for some of the world's leading sports organizations and properties and blue-chip brands, helping to create award-winning omni-channel marketing campaigns, result-driven sales strategies, and impactful brand-building initiatives. But all that work doesn't compare to the fun, excitement, and challenges I've been fortunate to experience working for the king of all sports, polo. For nearly a decade, I've put my heart and ambition into helping advance the sport of polo. I've made lifelong friendships, met some incredible people, traveled to memorable polo destinations, and heard the craziest stories. My goal is to share these people, places, and stories with you and provide a unique behind-the-scenes perspective of the game that breaks all the common stereotypes, all while discussing key issues affecting the sport today and the constructive sharing of ideas, insights, solutions, and best case studies for the purpose of advancing polo globally. Every week, I will have honest conversations with polo industry leaders, enthusiasts, and awe-inspiring people who make this sport great and fun to be around. I hope through their knowledge and their unique perspectives, they will motivate and inspire you. Together, we will explore ways you can make small tweaks to boost your polo business, whether you are a club, event, team, or player, that will amount to big changes in revenue, participation, attendance, and exposure. Saddle up. Welcome to Outside the Boards with me, Danny O'Leary. Hi everyone, Danny O'Leary here, and welcome to Season 3 of the Outside the Boards podcast. On this episode of Outside the Boards, I'm really excited to welcome United States Polo Association's Chief Operating Officer and in-house counsel, Mr. Chris Green. Instrumental in writing and implementing rules which affect polo at all levels, Chris has spent the last 6 years behind the scenes learning the inner workings of the association before stepping into the role as COO and in-house counsel. A member of the USPA for over 40 years, Green was first introduced to the game in his 20s in Kentucky and now plays both outdoor polo at Giant Valley Polo Club in Hamden, Connecticut, and arena at Gardentown Polo Club in Newburgh, New York. Mentoring, umpiring, and helping to mount Gardentown interscholastic and middle school polo players, the former governor at large has actively shaped the future of polo, volunteering his time and expertise on several USPA committees over the years. Born in Lexington, Kentucky, Green grew up in the horse racing industry, briefly attending Princeton University before coming home to breed and train thoroughbreds for the racetrack. Returning to college after deciding to make a career change, the poetry enthusiast and avid reader studied English at the University of Kentucky and went on to earn his JD from the University of Virginia School of Law. Taking a hiatus from polo to focus on law school and starting a new career as a litigator, Green and his family moved to Hudson Valley in New York, where he has been a partner in the international law firm Boies Schiller Flexner since 2003. Green's genuine love for polo is felt from your first conversation with him. Bringing a solid understanding of the rules as chairman of the Rules Interpretation Committee and a wealth of knowledge in sports law, Green is looking forward to helping the association draw more players to the game by creating the best experience possible for its existing members. In my conversation with Green, you will get behind-the-scenes perspective of the man who is helping to change the game for the better on the field and making it more fair while enhancing its competitiveness. Excited to see what Chris has in store for the USPA. So let's get started, everyone. Enjoy. Chris Green, welcome at this early morning hour. Well, it's 9 o'clock your time, 8 o'clock my time, so it's pretty earlier for me. But thank you for joining me, and happy Thanksgiving to you.
Well, thanks, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and it's been a good Thanksgiving, and I hope you had a good one as well.
Where do you spend the holidays? Are you in Florida?
No, I'm not in Florida right now. I have a little farm in Hudson Valley of New York, near Rhinebeck, New York. So that's my home. I spend a large part of the summer in New York. I'll go back and forth to Wellington as I need to and to other places, but I don't go to Florida full time until after Christmas, and I'll be there through the end of the U.S. Open.
Yeah, no, that's the busy time for sure. Do you have a relatively big Thanksgiving and big family?
You know, I come from a big family. I was one of 5 kids, and I had 47 first cousins on my dad's side. I have 3 daughters. My wife is no longer alive, but my oldest daughter lives in Kentucky, where I'm from, and she has two children. And my two youngest daughters are here with me in Rhinebeck today. They live in Brooklyn. One works in Brooklyn, one works in the city. So we didn't celebrate Thanksgiving on Thursday. We celebrated on Friday because of work schedules. But we had a really good day.
Good deal. Good deal.
I was born and raised in central Kentucky. My dad worked for the Whitney family. He worked for Jock Whitney and Joan Pace, and then was the general manager at Green Tree Stud, which was a big thoroughbred breeding farm between Lexington and Paris. And that's where I grew up.
Now, how did that all get started in your family? You in the thoroughbred business? How far does that date back?
It goes way back. My mother's father was a guy named Hal Price Headley, and he was the driving force in reestablishing Keeneland as a racetrack after Jack Keene had started it, and it had essentially gone dormant for many, many years. So in the 30s, during the Depression, he got together a group of individuals to invest in reestablishing Keeneland, and he served as its first president from 1935 to 1962 when he died. So he was intimately involved in the horse business as a breeder and an owner and a trainer. And he's actually in the Horse Racing Hall of Fame at Saratoga. So that was my mother's father. And my dad's family was not involved in the horses until he met my mom and went to work for my grandfather. But then after that, he made his livelihood in the horse business. He first was the manager of Elmendorf Farm, working for Max Gluck. And in his first year as the manager there, he broke a crop of yearlings that next year, one of them named Prince John was the champion 2-year-old. So he, after working for Max for several years, went to work for the Whitney family and ran Green Tree for 25 years.
My gosh. And now you were involved in the industry as well, right? Before you got into polo?
Oh, yeah. That's all I thought I would ever do. I worked with horses from the time I was old enough to work. We lived right next to the foaling barn, and at Green Tree we had between 30 and 40 brood mares that would deliver foals every year. And I worked with the mares, helped deliver the foals, worked with the babies, the yearlings, the stallions. We had stallions there. My dad was the syndicate manager for Tom Fool, Key to the Mint, Arts and Letters, The Axe, Stop the Music, Hatchet Man, a lot of really nice horses. And I just worked with those horses. And so I really thought I was going to be in the thoroughbred business as a livelihood, and I was until I was in my mid-30s.
What were some of your best memories from that industry? Is there like one thing in particular, a win or horse or anything like that that just sticks out in your memory?
Oh, I have a lot of good memories from a life around horses, around thoroughbred horses. I guess one of the most memorable things was seeing a homebred Stage Door Johnny win the Belmont. But I also had the opportunity to see Secretariat win the Derby. We went to the Derby every year, and I just was around a lot of really nice horses, and of course some average and below average horses too. You can't escape encountering them. So I thought that when I first went away to college, I was more interested in being in the horse business, and I kind of essentially dropped out of college after a couple of years and boarded horses with my brothers and was on the farm buying and selling yearlings. And I finally decided to go to the racetrack and learn about that part of the business, which is really the core of the business. And I went to work for a trainer, got my own training license, and trained horses for a few years before I decided to try to make a living with a real job. So I've had a lot of exposure to racing, both on the farm, breeding on the farm, and racing on the racetrack. And I could bore you for hours with stories about it.
Have you raced yourself at all?
I mean, I trained horses. I had a public stable, and the horses I trained won 6 races, and I had a winning percentage of about 25%, which is not bad, but it's a really challenging way to make a living. And it requires that you be a self-promoter and always be getting new horses and hustling new owners. And that was not a part of the business I was particularly good at. I really loved being around the horses and at the barn, but I was just not a promoter, not cut out for that. So it's interesting, or you might find it interesting. My mom said at that time, I was 35, I was married, I had a child, I was stabled at Churchill Downs, I had horses there. And she said, you should go get tested by a psychologist to see if maybe there's another profession that would be better for you. So I went and spent a day getting tested by this vocational psychologist.
I could take that as an insult. I don't know if that's...
No, I mean, it's, when your mom says it.
That's a funny thing for your mom to ask.
Yeah, you have to listen, though. She said she would pay for it. So I said, okay, I'm game. And I went for a day and I got tested. And at the end of the day, I met with the doctor, and he said, you'll never be satisfied with your job or your career unless you go back to school and get a bachelor's degree and go on and get an advanced degree, because only with those credentials can you get the sort of job that will keep your mind occupied and be productive.
Mm-hmm.
So I did go back to school. I got a bachelor's degree at UK when I was 39, and then I went to law school at Virginia, and I got a law degree at 42. And it was a lot easier the second time around when I was a little bit older. I enjoyed it. It was a big change for me.
How did it feel going to some of those classes?
I was 16 or 17 years older than all my classmates. So it felt a little weird, but they were very generous to me and kind, and we got along fine. And it just was sort of like a reboot. And I really loved what I was studying. I loved the law. And I ultimately got a job in New York City practicing law for a big law firm. That's when I came north. That was in about 1996, 7. Yeah.
Now, what law did you practice specifically?
Well, I first worked for a big corporate law firm in the city called Debevoise and Plimpton. And I was a litigator, but you didn't get the opportunity to go to court in that sort of environment because all the clients were great big corporations that tried to, at all costs, avoid a trial. So most of the practice was around, escaping the possibility of going to trial. And it was pretty dull. I did it for 3 or 4 years. But I then got recruited by a guy that was starting a new law firm. And he was one of the best, if not the best, trial lawyer of the last 25 years of the 20th century. His name was David Boies. And David was a brilliant trial lawyer. And I went to work for David, and I worked for him as a trial lawyer for 22 years, and got an opportunity to try a lot of really interesting cases and do a lot of really interesting things. And that was great. That was really what I went to law school for.
You enjoyed being in the courtroom.
I did. I mean, enjoyed is really not exactly the right word. It's challenging, and it's also can be intimidating and frightening to be the person on whom the company's success rests, if only for the period of time that you're addressing the court or the judge. But if you just focus on your work and do the best you can and try not to get too anxious about the stakes involved, sometimes it works out. I mean, I tried jury cases where we got huge verdicts and did international arbitrations, and yeah, they were really rewarding and really fun. And you got the opportunity each time to learn about something that you'd never known about before, because we tried cases in all areas. So it was really fun.
Not to make this conversation personal, my wife is a very talented employment attorney here in Chicago. And she enjoys the courtroom too. She's a very talented litigator. And
Mhm.
most of the time, these things are settled out of court, but
Right,
she's the go-to in the event that it does go to court.
right,
So,
right.
but yeah, I mean, she sees the challenging experience that they have with it, and selecting juries and
Yeah,
that whole entire
it's,
process. Yeah,
it's a whole world in itself, all by itself. And in order to be successful as a litigator or a trial lawyer, you have to prepare from the beginning of every case to take it to trial. And you can't think about cases as settlement opportunities. You have to think about how you're going to win them. If you can approach them that way, generally you're a lot better prepared than your opponent.
hmm
Because most people try to settle cases. And if you're the party that's pushing things forward to get to the courtroom, generally people come to their knees somewhere along the way
yeah.
because they don't want to go there.
So, following law school, obviously you worked for these law firms and what have you. Did paths cross at all between what you're doing in law and in the equestrian business at all?
Well, I've always had this connection to polo. When I was a kid at Green Tree, we couldn't ride the horses. They were thoroughbreds, and they were only ridden when they left the farm to be broken, and they were ridden by exercise riders and jockeys that all weighed less than 145 pounds. So I didn't get the opportunity to ride when I was growing up, and that my parents were not into riding per se. So it was in my 20s that friends of mine persuaded me to start playing polo, and I had to learn how to ride such as I know before I started. So I started playing polo in my mid 20s, and I played for 9 or 10 years in Lexington before I went to the racetrack because I could keep horses turned out in the field pretty easily and manage it. It was low goal polo. So I achieved a rating of 1 goal outdoors. I played some indoor polo, but that was before the Argentines really came to America and before we had the compression at the lower end of the handicap spectrum. So I would never make 1 goal today, even at my best. So I played polo for 10 years. And then when I went to law school and I went to New York and first started practicing law, I didn't have time to ride. I didn't play for some extended period of time. But when I went to work for David Boys, the main office of the firm was in Westchester, a place called Armonk, which is near Greenwich. And my wife and I moved our young family up into the Millbrook area. And I would come home on the weekends, be mowing the grass, and I'd see these trailers going by to Mashomick. And I thought, man, I'd really like to get on a polo horse again. I was getting a little bit more settled in my career and financially secure. So I took a lesson that I won or bought at a charity auction from Julio Escura at Mashomick. And I started playing polo again at Mashomick, and I played there for a couple of years. It was close to where I lived in Stanfordville, New York. And I played there for a couple of years, and then I played at Sam Ramirez's club for a couple of years.
Okay. Yeah.
And then after playing at Sam's, I started playing at Butch Butterworth's Giant Valley Club in Camden, Connecticut, which is where I've been playing ever since. Now, along the way, I played arena polo in the winters at Gardner Town in Newburgh, New York, at Bill Danker's Gardner Town Polo Club. So during that period of time, from early 2000s until a couple of years ago, I played year-round in arena in the winter and outdoor polo in the summer. Always 4 or 6 goal polo at the most, but always really, really enjoyed it and still do. I still play in the summers.
Is there any notable people that you had played with, professional-wise or amateur?
When I was at Mashomick, I would play in practice games with Michel Dorignac, who's a really good 7-goal player, or was at the time, and other people that were good, really solid players at Mashomick. Henry Zavaleta, Julio Escura, a number of really nice players there. Of course, Sam's, we got to play with Tommy Biddle and Brandon Phillips and Chris Campson. They would come through there in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And then at Giant Valley, it's more of a 1-goal players, 2-goal players, the occasional 3-goal player, a lot of 0-goal players. It's more of a farm polo kind of family polo situation.
Yeah.
It's not 8-goal or even 12-goal. It's 4-goal and 6-goal polo.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I should say that when I first started in Kentucky, one of my closest friends was one of the big sponsors. His name was Bruce Hundley, and there was another guy named Wayne Lister. And they would bring Joe Barry and Bart Evans in for the summer. So I got to know Joe and I got to know Bart and play with them when they were both 9 goals. Of course, they took it easy on all of us rubes from Lexington. But it was really fun, being around them and getting to see what they could do and get to know them as people.
Now, is this when you were just starting out? Because I was thinking, in a sea of thoroughbred racing, it's just like, where were the polo ponies?
Yeah, no, it was when I was first starting out. It was at the horse park in Lexington, Kentucky. We had one big field there that we sort of made into a polo field. And there was a group of local players, Nick Rennekamp, Hillary Boone, Bill Hilliard, Hoppy Hinton, Kellen Strauss, myself, several others. And we'd have a big exhibition game every summer where Joe and Bart, we got Dickie Kuhn from Chicago, who's a friend of mine, and Skeeter Johnson and other people to come in for. And we played polo all summer long at the horse park in the heart of Lexington. Will Ferris played there. Speaking of a crossover between thoroughbred racing and polo, Will played with us. When he first came to Kentucky and first bought Lane's End and got started in the horse business, seriously full time. So there was a lot of crossover. Everyone that was playing in Lexington at that time had some connection to thoroughbred racing.
You guys couldn't ride thoroughbred. It's not like you guys were racing horses. So this was like the next best thing for you to get on a horse was to play polo?
There was a big horse community in Lexington. They've always had hunters and jumpers, and they've always had 3-day eventing and so forth. And a lot of the guys that were playing polo had ridden quite a bit more than I had. Bruce Hundley came from Arkansas, and he was essentially from a more of a Western background. And a lot of the guys had ridden Western, and some of them had played polo, for quite some time. And it was sort of your opportunity to get on a horse, because most of us were too big to, effectively ride young thoroughbred horses.
Mm-hmm.
You try to keep it light on those horses. Although, when I went on the racetrack, I did have some big, tough horses that I got heavy people to ride because nobody else could handle them. But generally, it was an opportunity to get closer to horses and learn more about horses and really connect with them that you don't get if you just work with them on the ground.
Outside the Board Season 3 podcast is presented by the United States Polo Association. The United States Polo Association is organized and exists for the purpose of promoting the game of polo, coordinating the activities of its member clubs and registered player members, arranging and supervising polo tournaments, competitions, and games, and providing rules, handicaps, and tournament conditions for those events. Its overarching goals are improving the sport and promoting the safety and welfare of its human and equine participants. Founded in 1890, the USPA is the largest voluntary sports organization in North America for the sport of polo. The USPA is currently made up of more than 200 member clubs and over 5,000 registered player members. It annually awards and oversees roughly 50 national tournaments hosted by its member clubs. For more information, please visit uspolo.org.
What made polo so attractive? I mean, were other equestrian disciplines afforded to you, but just polo was your thing?
I think the fundamental thing that people love about polo is it's a ball sport.
Mm-hmm.
There's just something about a ball and 2 goals at opposite ends of the field that is fundamentally attractive to humans. I mean, basketball, football, soccer, they're all effectively rugby. They're all ball sports, and people just love moving that ball around. And in polo, you get to do it, on a horse. It's like the greatest game you could possibly play, where you can sit down the whole time. I mean, it's just amazing. And I just really was taken by it, from, like everybody that loves polo, from the first time you got the chance to hit that ball, you were totally hooked. And I was also, I think, captivated by the rules of the game and trying to figure out, how those rules worked and how you could take advantage of them and what was fair and what was not. And so I've always been a serious student, I guess, of the rules of polo.
Now, is this where your legal mind comes into play? Is the attractiveness of the rules?
It's kind of what drew me back into the USPA. I was never very active in the USPA when I was younger. But when I got older and after I started playing again at Mashomack, some of my close friends from the early days, including Tom Gose, who came and played in our events in Lexington, and Mark Sadaka, who played with us in Lexington. He lived in Cincinnati. Both of those guys were on the board of the USPA, and they reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in volunteering for the rules committee of USPA. And I said, sure. And I got involved in the rules committee and basically started helping to write, rule changes. And ultimately, I became the chairman of the rules committee. And I served in that role for 3 or 4 years until I went to work for the USPA in 2021. So I think being a lawyer and being someone who makes a living writing, which is basically what you do when you're a civil litigator, you write a lot of briefs, you write a lot of arguments, you prepare a lot of presentations, was very helpful to me in writing rules. But they thought that, I was a help in writing rules. So that's what led me back to getting involved.
What was the most challenging thing about being on the rules committee? Was it just trying to implement new rules, or, getting the feedback from players and what have you, what works, what doesn't work?
I think that there are a lot of challenging things about being on the rules committee in particular, and, chairing it especially. You try to solve for egregious problems that arise during the year where unfairness results or safety issues result. And you try to account for everyone's point of view and get input from players and rules committee members to formulate a new rule. You don't want to be changing the rules constantly, because people need to sort of have some sense that the rules are secure and not, just ad hoc.
Mm-hmm.
But if you change a rule in polo, it inevitably has, some unintended consequence somewhere else, because all the rules are so inextricably bound. And the hardest thing is, I think, being imaginative enough to understand what would be a good change, and then disciplined enough to write it in a way that everyone can understand, but also be mindful of what effect it has throughout the rules that exist that are not being changed. So, sometimes it's a 1 step forward, 2 steps back thing. Sometimes you have to make changes on top of changes. And we've done some things to accommodate for that. Oftentimes, instead of just changing a rule, we'll write in what's called an optional tournament condition. And it's effectively a new rule, but it's one that host tournament committees can either apply in a tournament or not at their choice. And that way you get a chance to try out a rule change in a particularly well-supervised setting and see how it works before you enact it as a full-blown rule change.
Mm-hmm.
But we've made some good ones and we've made some bad ones, and we've taken back some of the ones we made because we didn't think they worked as well as we wanted them to. And it's sort of an iterative process, you know. We made some big, I think, really good changes over the last several years.
What were some of the changes that probably had the most amount of positive impact?
I think the single best change that we have instituted in the USPA and the rules is the possession change when the ball goes out of bounds. Instead of coming back to a throw in at the point where the ball goes out of bounds, possession changes in favor of the team that did not hit the ball out of bounds, and they get a free hit from right there by the sideboard. And that has really speeded up the game, and it's also minimized a lot of strategic behavior where people would, hit the ball out of bounds when they saw the clock winding down and they had a lead and they didn't want the other team to come back, sort of basically put it in a four corner by hitting the ball out of bounds with no adverse consequence. So, that's a really good change. I think that's the one I would point to as the one that I'm really the proudest of.
Do you find yourself when looking to, let's say, change or add a rule, do you look at other sports and based on the success that this rule has had, that can it work in our sport at all?
Yeah, we do. And we're doing that right now. It's interesting you would bring it up because right now we're wrestling with the offsides rule in polo. The rule as it's currently written is logically coherent, but it's also one that I don't think a lot of people understand, and it's hard for them to understand it in the game situation. And so I think my colleague Fergus Gould, who's the executive director of our Umpires LLC, would confirm what I say when I say that a lot of people in polo spend a lot of time offsides without even realizing it.
Yeah.
So we're trying to wrestle with how to reconfigure that rule so that it's a little bit more user-friendly and user-understandable. And in doing that, we're looking at offsides rules in other sports to try to understand if there's a way to use them as a model for our rule, keeping in mind, that other ball sports are different in the sense that there's no horses involved. But yeah, we struggle with that, and that's one of the strategies we do employ when we're trying to revise a rule.
Now, what about rule changes when it comes to other polo governing bodies, like the big three, Hurlingham, Argentina, and the United States? They're doing rule changes as well. Like, do these all somewhat align with each other? Do you guys communicate with each other?
We have a meeting at least once a year, and it's next week in Buenos Aires. It's right before the Open final, and I go down for that. And the HPA rule makers and the AAP rule makers and the USPA rule makers all sit in the room and talk about, recurring problems and what our thoughts are on how to address them in the rules. And so we do try to coordinate with the AAP and the HPA so that an ideal situation is, one set of rules governing all three associations. But you have to understand that polo in this country is different from polo in Argentina and in England, and the concerns are different and the cultures are different. So that comes into play, and at the margins, in the corner cases, there are differences in the rules. Those differences are usually explained by either, just structural differences between the countries or cultural differences. So, it's a constant effort on the part of those three associations to at least identify the places where the rules are necessarily different for one reason or another, and so that the players in the world of polo can, be aware of what those differences are, what the similarities are, and be well prepared to.
Is there a lot of agreement or disagreement in some of those meetings based on what one country is doing versus the other?
I'd say it's about 50-50. I think that most things we agree upon, sometimes we don't agree. Like, for example, in our rules on the penalty fours from the 60, it's a defended penalty. And we have a rule that says if you hit the ball with intent to score, it's not required to go through the goal from the one hit. You can follow it up and play it again if you trying to score but miss hit it and it only goes 30 yards.
Mm-hmm.
That's a rule that we have in the U.S. to accommodate the fact that although almost anyone who's rated 2 or 3 goals or higher can hit a penalty 4 in on the fly, almost everyone who's rated 0 cannot. And a lot of our polo is at 0 goals and 1 goal, 2 goals. And we can't have a rule that makes it impossible for a team in a 0 goal game, which is, maybe 60% of our polo, to score a penalty 4.
Yeah.
You just can't, So the Brits are a little bit more purist about that, and the Argentines are as well. But we have to keep, the whole ecosystem of American polo in mind when we write rules. Now, some rules we basically say this is the rule 16 goals and above, and this is the rule at 15 goals and below. But we try not to do that any more than we absolutely have to because it gets too complicated.
So the rule that you're basically saying is that if you're a 0 goal polo player, that individual hitting the ball can make an assist for his teammate to pick up and score?
I mean, he can follow it himself,
Yeah.
as long as he's trying to hit it through the goal. If he mishits and it only goes 30 yards, he can follow it himself and make a play on it as long as he has the right of way. But, you can't do that in England. You can't play the ball twice if you're the hitter on a penalty 4.
Interesting.
So there are differences, there are other differences as well, but that's one that comes to mind.
What's currently on the rules committee that's being discussed or explored?
There have been a lot of changes approved by the board for 2023, and we're just in the process of writing those up and getting them out to our membership. I think one important change that comes to mind, we've made changes to the American rule, which is a rule that applies in American polo about having registered player members on teams, to make it a rule that gives more opportunities to American players. But I think one rule, sort of a field rule that I'm thinking about that is changing for 2023 is hitting into a horse. If you're in control of the ball and you slow down to a hand canter or a walk, and you then hit the ball into a horse of a defending player, the question really is that player in your right of way, in which case the foul is on him, or is that player not in your right of way and just happens to be between you and the goal, in which case the foul is on you? So we don't want people just flailing into horses.
Yeah.
It happens more than it should. And so we are redesigning the rule that no one has a right to hit the goal if they don't have the right of way to goal. And so we want to make the rule clear that, if you're slowing down and then hitting the goal and someone just happens to be between you and the goal, you hit his horse with that ball, it's a foul on you. But if he's in your right of way, he's fouling you. So that's a distinction we haven't previously made that we're making for 2023, and we'll see how it works.
What are your thoughts on, since it's probably been about 10 years since it's been implemented, drone technology when it comes to the umpiring of games and a lot of the implementation of some of these rules and what have you? Do you think that has changed the game substantially for polo?
I think it has changed the game. I think it's minimized to some extent the role of the third man because you're going to the film, not to a third man unaccompanied by film. We have a list of calls that can be challenged by the teams, and they're entitled to 1 challenge per half and 1 challenge in overtime as a general matter. And then we have a list of triggers that umpires can use to review certain kinds of plays. And the way in which those two lists interact is interesting. Some people say that one perspective is that having an instant replay official and a drone has slowed down the game because you take the time to look at the film whenever there's a challenge or a trigger that you wouldn't take before. But I think on balance, it has increased the accuracy of calls, and that is a good thing.
Yeah.
That's an unalloyed good thing. And so I think the little bit of extra time that it takes, if it continues to contribute to the accuracy of calls, is not consequential. So, yeah, I'm in favor of it. We don't do it at all levels. Of course, you can't afford to have a draw in every kind of polo game, but mostly at the higher levels, you do have instant replay, and we have a lot of instant replay in the USPA.
Well, the way that you described its purpose is universal when it comes to its like instant replay and all that kind of stuff, and the ability to challenge calls is universal with every mainstream sport. I forget which one was the last to kind of implement it. I don't know if it was soccer, or I know there's still debate in using it with soccer.
Yeah.
You know, baseball obviously uses it now. Football's been using it for a long time now. So, I mean, if it provides the game to be more fairly played, yes, I think everyone would be in agreement that, yeah, it does slow things down. I mean, what's worse watching a football game than having the refs do a review of a challenged play?
Right.
But if the outcome ultimately becomes in favor or non-favor, I mean, it could change the outcome of the game dramatically.
Yeah, I think it's generally a good thing. And I think that most of our member clubs and our members agree that the USPA's Umpires LLC and its core of professional umpires that now officiate all USPA events and most tournaments in this country have really contributed to the increase in the quality of the competition and fairness. So that's something that we're very focused on, continuing to build on, continuing to increase our core of professional umpires and increase the quality of the core. And I think that that is a place where the USPA really touches its membership, and that is, you know, the point of contact that we have with most of our members.
Yeah.
And it's a very important point of contact, and most people think it's been a real benefit.
Now, Chris, I'm beginning to realize why you were roped into being the chief of operations for the USPA now. How did you get roped into that technically? I mean, I'm assuming that the transition with the rules committee and having to chair that for a number of years played an enormous role into that.
It's interesting. I did it with my eyes wide open. I didn't get roped in, but here's how it happened. I was practicing law and I was chairing the rules committee, and I had a lot of experience by that time. I was a governor of the USPA. I was on the board, governor at large. This was in 2021. And I had a lot of experience in watching how decisions were made at the USPA, how it's governed, how the executive committee operates, all the programs that it manages, and had a lot of sort of exposure to all of it as a result of those different roles. It was during COVID, right? So COVID, the courts had been locked down for 2 years, and I was basically practicing law from home, and it was boring as hell because, you know, there was no opportunity to go to court or appear in any hearings except by Zoom. And
that had to be miserable for you.
It was. And I was thinking, you know, this is really not that much fun anymore. The USPA had made a change in its staff. It didn't have a CEO at the time. Bob Putz, who was the prior CEO, is a good friend of mine, had left the USPA. And the officers of the USPA were essentially performing his duties during a period that lasted about a year. And I was here at home, and my wife, Susan, was quite ill. She ultimately passed away from breast cancer here at home.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
That's fine. Thank you for saying that. It was difficult. It happened in January of this year. But prior to that, 6 or 8 months prior to that, I was sitting around one day wishing I was in court and thinking, man, I just maybe need to do something else for a living because this is really starting to wear on me. And I thought, well, I should just volunteer to apply for that job as CEO of the USPA. That would be really fun. And I spoke to a couple of the officers about it. And by that time, I think they were getting a little tired of running the USPA. And they said, well, we should have a job search and you should put in your resume. So the USPA had a job search, and I did put in my resume, and I was chosen to be the next COO. They changed the title from CEO to COO in recognition of the fact that really the chairman of the USPA is the chief executive.
Mm-hmm.
So I became the COO, and I also was given the title of in-house counsel, which the USPA had never had before. So I actually serve in two roles as chief operating officer and in-house counsel. And I've been doing that since the 1st of July of 2021, now going on about a year and a half. And it's been a kick. I really, really like it.
What are some of the initiatives that you're doing in your role as COO?
Well, the first thing I did, I think that you would call a major initiative. It wasn't really an initiative that I was responsible for 100%, but the board decided to purchase a permanent home for the USPA in Wellington. And so I was responsible for sourcing opportunities, working with Stuart Armstrong, who's the chairman, and ultimately negotiating the purchase of what was previously known as IPC, the International Polo Club. Mm-hmm. And we purchased IPC with the board's approval under the large expenditures policy in July of this year. I did all of the negotiations with prior ownership. And since we purchased IPC, we've had to do a lot of structuring around, which we now call it the National Polo Center, NPC. And we formed a subsidiary to operate the polo assets and a subsidiary to operate the hospitality assets, because under our 501c6 tax-free status, we have to do things that are aligned completely with our mission, which is advancing polo. And anything that's not fundamentally aligned with that mission, like operating a restaurant, for example, or playing tennis or whatever, has to be held in a for-profit subsidiary. So we've had to do a lot of structuring and a lot of organization to get two boards together to operate those subsidiaries, to figure out how to operate the property, how to improve the property, how to prepare for the Gauntlet of Polo, which will be hosted there by the USPA for the first time. We had to do the entire hosting of the FIP World Championships as our soft opening at NBC. So we've been really, really busy, and I've been, involved in all of them.
Yeah. I used to work for the United States Polo Association. Prior to that, I worked for a company called IEG Consulting that helped to build the USPA's commercial platform. And at that time, the USPA didn't have a lot of valuable assets that could be translated into commercial opportunity. And one of those was you didn't own the main stage for your tournaments. It's all given to that property. So when we took that approach, we had to design as this is what you have now, but this is what you should have and work towards in the future, because you are missing out on a large revenue potential by giving these assets away. Well, so much has changed now in the last decade, and getting that. I remember talking to Justin Powers, and we're just like, let's brush off this report because I think it's still relevant, very much still relevant. We just need to change the numbers a little bit.
It's a very interesting topic. It's very important for us as the USPA for the property to be a polo center, not a polo club, because we don't want to compete with our member clubs. We want to allow our member clubs to leverage this property to their benefit. So the only tournament or tournament series that is now been categorized as an NPC tournament series is the Gauntlet, the 22 gold tournaments, the CD Whitney, the Gold Cup, and the Open. But we are using the NPC otherwise to host a 16-goal Super Series that is sponsored by 4 Florida clubs, and an 8-goal Super Series that's sponsored by 4 Florida clubs. And any club that wants to play a game on a backfield or even field one at NPC needs merely apply and pay the field rental. So we hope, Danny, over time, that more and more it will be a place where national and regional competitions play their championships. And we feel real strongly about making it a place that everyone who's a USPA member or USPA member club can be proud of and feel part of and get use from. So that's a big part of if not the driving mission of owning the facility is to assure, permanency in the polo ecosystem. I'm hopeful it'll work.
Wasn't there a long ago, I think this is even before I was part of the USPA, that there was a kind of a national polo center platform or regional polo center platform? Is that something that could be reinstituted at all based on this purchase or no?
It's always been the case that the Open and the main tournaments have been awarded by the tournament committee to member clubs. There's also been National 8 goal tournaments and other tournaments at other goal levels that have a national scope.
Mm-hmm.
The USPA is organized geographically in circuits, and so it is structurally available to the USPA to have regional polo centers, and that may be something we do in the future. There's been discussion around that, but you're probably going above my knowledge of the USPA history to talk about, regional platforms. I'm not really that well versed in that area.
Outside the Board Season 3 podcast is presented by the National Polo Center Wellington. The National Polo Center in Wellington, Florida is located in the heart of South Florida's legendary horse country. The permanent home for polo in America, NPC is owned and managed by the United States Polo Association to showcase the finest the sport has to offer. The association's premier event, the Gauntlet of Polo, takes place from February to April each winter season. Throughout the year, the facilities are also used to showcase USPA member clubs and prestigious national tournament competition. Watching polo from the stadium, private boxes, field-side tailgates, or special hospitality tents, all overlooking the US Polo ASSN Field 1 is an unparalleled experience. NPC invites you to enjoy the best polo in the country, taking place at one of the most beautiful venues in the world, the National Polo Center Wellington. For more information, visit nationalpolocenter.com.
So now that we have the NPC locked in right now, I have no doubt that's probably an ongoing thing right now since that's incredibly new. You just got past the FIP World Championships, which was a great success. That's a lot of work to kick off a new property and new venue for such a high profile event. What do you have in the queue lined up for yourself as a COO?
Well, I think that we've still got a lot of work to do at NPC. Getting through the MyGoal season is a lot of work, even putting aside the issues of the facility while we're trying to redesign it, modernize it, and give it attention that it hasn't been given over the past several years in terms of structural maintenance and improvements and so forth. Mm-hmm. We reinstalled Field 2 at NPC, which was a huge project, and hopefully it'll be ready for play in late April. But I think going beyond NPC, we want to continue to focus on the governance of polo and creating demand for polo throughout the country. Particular initiatives that I know are under discussion at the leadership level are supporting polo in Southern California in the desert, mm-hmm. where it's been under pressure from commercial forces around the owner of the concert series that occur.
Yeah, at Empire. Yeah.
And so that's one thing. Another thing is I know there's a lot of focus on Stewart's part on trying to elevate the role of polo breeders in this country to try to build on what we have learned from the Argentine ecosystem, where breeding polo horses is such an important part of the success of Argentine polo. The great Argentine players of today and previously have access to tremendous horse resources. And we're trying to think about creative ways to incentivize people to breed polo horses and to raise and train polo horses in this country so that we can get our players, our American players, that same sort of access in the long term. That's a big project, and it's very much in the discussion stages, but that's the kind of long-term thinking and vision that Stewart brings to his role as chairman.
So similar to like La Delfina, or I know like Freddie Mac's Alegria team just had down there. I think they had a huge horse auction. I know they have really big breeding programs.
Yeah, they have big breeding programs, and all of the Argentine players, high goal players, are playing for essentially breeding organizations, and they are showcasing their horses before the world when they play in the Argentine Open and the other tournaments that occur in Argentina. And in order for our players to reach the top of the pyramid, which is our long-term goal, they have to have the horses to compete.
Yeah.
They have to not only be great players, but they have to get access to great horses. And some of them are able to access great horses through connections in Argentina, but many of them are not. And so we're just thinking about how can we sort of create perhaps a breeding program modeled on the breeding incentives, state breeding programs in the thoroughbred business, or the breeding programs in the quarter horse business, to incentivize people who are not necessarily players, but are connected to polo and thinking of polo and love to watch it, to breed horses for polo so that our players can showcase those horses and thereby make connections that get them mounted in a way that's potentially at some point in the future competitive with the way the Argentine players are mounted.
Yeah.
That's a really long-term sort of a very fuzzy goal or fuzzy thought about how to reach a very finite goal. But, we're just beginning to try to really think about that.
That type of industry that exists, I'm assuming, very healthy within thoroughbred racing, right? Similar to what they might do down there. Is there anyone who, aside from the USPA, but a player or breeder or trainer that is trying to do that here in the US at all? Has La Delfino or any of those guys brought that program here to the US to replicate?
Bob Jordanava's J5 has a really strong breeding program where they breed the horses that Valiente and many other teams associated with Valiente play. Mark and Melissa Ganzi obviously breed and train and operate a large population of top quality polo horses. There are a few examples of really successful breeding and training programs in this country, and I don't mean to leave anyone out, but in the early days of American polo, the great players, the Cecil Smiths, Roy Berries, they launched their career as makers of horses, and the horses were horses that came from the West, that were basically ranch horses. And they had access to all the ranch horses they wanted, and they could make them into polo horses and sell them as they played them for sponsors.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of ecosystem doesn't really exist anymore. And we need to figure out, how the up and coming great American players that are not connected to Argentina can establish a pipeline of horses for themselves. And perhaps the way to do that, what we're thinking, is to incentivize people that are breeding horses to breed them for polo, specifically for polo. It's not something that the USPA would fund. I think it would have to take something that people that were interested in this whole moonshot idea would have to fund privately, perhaps through some sort of an organization like the PTF or the AIPF or some sort of taxable organization dedicated to, increasing the quality of the American polo horse.
Yeah.
And the quantity. It's just a thought. It's a thought we're having, and it's a thought we're kicking around. But you asked what's on the horizon. That's something that's sort of a project we're all excited about. It's in the very early stages of discussions.
No, that's a great project, though, because, it forces people like myself or who are not familiar about the industry of polo to kind of cross-examine why it works so well in one country and why it doesn't work in another. Fred Mannix was a guest of mine last season, and we had a great conversation about the cultural differences between how polo is so accessible in Argentina where it's not here.
Right.
going down that path is very similar to why, basketball, for example, why is basketball so popular in inner cities throughout the country and that sort of thing versus, soccer in another place. And it's very similar in terms of when you look at those social dynamics within the sport of polo and other sports, here in the US. You can apply that same thing. And the horse is still very much part of Argentina's culture and its economy and all that kind of stuff. Here, it's not. It's a luxury item up here. It's not involved the way it is in Argentina. So it's not as accessible. And up here, it's much more expensive. Down there, it's far less expensive. So it's interesting when you pull back the curtain on these industries, because I get questions all the time like, why is it so big down there in Argentina? And I have to walk them down this path or turn them to my podcast with Fred Mannix, who will go down the path with you. It's a fascinating world. It really is.
They have a horse-based culture there, or largely. The polo ecosystem is reflective of a horse-based culture. And we have pockets of that in this country, and people that are certainly horse-based people, the people that live their lives around horses and are dedicated to horses, as I'm sure you are. Many people in the USPA are. But there are structural reasons why they are able to have this vast supply of polo horses, and we don't. And we're just trying to understand what those structural reasons are and see if we can lower some of the barriers. Everyone who knows anything about polo knows it's 80% about the horses.
Yeah.
At least. And we need the horses. We need those incredible horses.
Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating. It's the horse culture there is still prevalent. And, it's not so much here in the U.S., despite the fact that the United States has had such a deep horse culture before. Hopefully, with these popular shows like Yellowstone, it brings it all back.
Well, apparently it has had a huge impact in quarter horse business, according to this gentleman we're working with who's heavily involved in that. I mean, Yellowstone has been to the quarter horse business what F1 has been to Formula One. I mean, it's amazing how in today's world, technology or entertainment, if you will, can build a following for what otherwise would be considered by most to be an archaic endeavor.
I know the Queen's Gambit, for example, had a big effect on chess
coming
back in popularity. And then you have Drive to Survive, which is the Formula One series on Netflix, which has really boosted the popularity of Formula One, especially here in the United States.
Along those same lines, Danny, just sort of trying to take a page from F1, the USPA engaged Running Iron Creative, which is a creative company that does video work. It's operated by Rob Jornavis, to do a 3-part docuseries about the USA team and the FIP tournament.
Yeah.
And they've been working on that throughout the tournament, which is, of course, now over. And we're just eagerly awaiting the first episode of that, which should be, getting towards final production in the not too distant future.
No, that's great.
Looking forward to seeing what they come up with that docuseries. And hopefully it'll be something that has 3 15 or 20-minute episodes that really give you, as the spectator and the viewer, an insight into what it's like to be on the USA team for FIP and to be involved in FIP and to play polo on horses you've not played before and so forth and so on. And we're hoping that'll be an interest generator.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff is fantastic. I know surfing just recently did it a few years ago as well. They're working with the same production company as I know the Formula One group has. But, in my conversations with potential sponsors and others, I always tell them, polo has this false perception of being highly affluent, the royal family, pomp and circ and champagne and all that kind of stuff. And I said, if you want to go and hang back in the corner where all the players are, it's a much different atmosphere.
Right.
Those guys are drinking Coronas and having a barbecue in his very blue jean type of atmosphere, something that I would probably attribute to the Cowboys in Yellowstone to some degree.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing about the sport at the end of the day, because it's not all Bentleys and Ferraris. It's GMC 2500 trucks and people drinking yellow jackets. And it's a vastly different world. But when people are educated more, it's far more attractive. It then appears to be accessible. It's now humanized, especially more so if you can do that with the horses as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're trying to focus on that aspect of things in our communications, in our efforts on social media and otherwise to disabuse people of the notion, that they have to trace to Charlemagne in order to get on a polo horse.
Yeah.
Because you don't see any Bentleys at Gardnertown. And you have a lot of people there having a whole lot of fun. And that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best thing. Like I remember my days, hanging out with Bob Janarvis and Mark Ganzi, Steve Van Andel and all those guys. And yeah, they're incredibly wealthy. They're titans in their industries and so on and so forth. But I got to tell you, hanging out with them in their backyard, having a drink with them, some of the most humble people I've ever met.
Yeah.
And talking to them in their element when they have no other stress of their work to worry about and they just want to talk about their family and their horses. It's a very attractive thing. And I wish, and on all the people who are not educated about polo to really try to experience that or see the game for what it's like behind the scenes, because I think it'll be that much more attractive to the mainstream audience. Yeah.
One of the things we're really trying to do at NPC is make it a gathering place for the polo community, make it a place where people that love polo, that both that play it or work in polo or just fans, feel comfortable coming and hanging out and visiting with one another. And that will be, to some degree, a measure of our success if we're able to do that.
Yeah. Now, I understand, to finish, you're a lover of poetry. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I do. Poetry. I'm an English major, and I studied poetry, in particular poetry of the modern era, which is the early part of this century. So, yeah.
Is there one author or poet that you often quote from?
Well, no, I don't quote a lot. I'm not smart enough to quote a lot, but I have my favorite poets. I mean, I love Robert Frost. I love William Butler Yeats. Those are my two favorites.
And any particular author? What are you reading these days?
Well, what I'm reading right now, I'm reading a book called The Passenger by Cormac McCarthy. I love Cormac McCarthy. Do you know him?
I do not.
Have you ever heard of the movie All the Pretty Horses?
Yes.
He wrote the book, All the Pretty Horses. It was part of a trilogy called the Border Trilogy. It's about cowboys on the border of Texas and Mexico. And he's just a brilliant writer of fiction and has wonderful ability to capture the dialect of the cowboy.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I love Cormac McCarthy. I'm reading his current book.
Now, you come across as someone of an outdoorsman, not just with horses, but is there anything outdoorsy you also do besides polo?
I spend time out on my little farm, mowing the grass and cleaning it up and fixing fence and that kind of stuff. But I do like being outdoors. Yeah, I do like it. But as far as somebody, saying I'm a hunter or I'm a fisherman or anything like that, no, I'm not. I'm just an amateur. Totally.
Well, Chris, this was a fantastic interview. It was incredibly enlightening as well as educational, very educational.
Well, I really enjoyed talking.
Just about the USPA, the rules committee, what's on the horizon. It's incredibly fascinating.
You're very kind. I really have enjoyed talking to you, and I look forward to meeting you in person, in the near future.
Absolutely. Come up to Chicago during our season between June and October. But I got to make my way down to Florida, so you might be seeing me around the U.S. Open come April.
Okay, well, if you do, be sure to look me up, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Chris. Again, happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. I wish you the best over the holidays. Safe travels.
Thank you, Danny.
In 2012, the founders of Outside the Boards witnessed their first polo match and were stunned by the sport's beauty and brutality. Few sports, if any, have these combined qualities. The sport's grace, intensity, and warlike imagery create a shock and awe viewing experience like none other. Combine this with the sport's party-like atmosphere and lifestyle, and you have a recipe for success. Today, the sport has yet to witness its full potential. The industry is fragmented, riddled with politics and inexperience. Outside the Boards was purposely designed to change all that and bring clarity to the sport by introducing best practices, insights, trends, and consulting services to industry stakeholders and interested brands so that they can reach their marketing potential and better navigate the sport. Whether you're a club seeking custom sponsorship and marketing solutions or simply looking for strategic advice, we encourage you to contact us today or subscribe to gain access to industry insights. Visit us at www.outsidetheboards.com or to learn more or email us at info@outsidetheboards.com. Now we have reached the part of the show where we address outside the boards issues affecting the sport of polo with the sharing of insights, ideas, and best practices towards solving everyday marketing, branding, and sponsorship problems, avoiding bad habits, or helping to navigate through new trends and how to best leverage those opportunities. Hi everyone, Danny O'Leary here. On this episode of Outside the Boards Insights, I wanted to bring up a topic that seems to be coming across my desk anywhere between 3 or 5 times a week, whether that be from my family, whether it be my business with Outside the Boards, whether that be the Oak Brook Polo Club, and that is the area of artificial intelligence in the specific area of marketing. So a lot of smart teams are using AI marketing to grow fast, and some of the biggest brands are using it. Google, IBM, Airbnb, Facebook, you name it, are using it. And there are so many platforms out there right now that you can use, each specializing in a specific area of need. And I have to admit, I'm still scratching the surface of this. But from what I've dabbled in, there is a big convenience factor for those who, let's say, are not experts in marketing and can't sit in front of a computer to write out content or edit photos and things like that, that these programs, apps and so on and so forth, have the ability to turn around things relatively quickly that you can use. Some are good, some are not the greatest. I'll be honest with you. I used one AI platform in order to write a children's book just out of nowhere. You know, I was laying in bed and I had the app on my lap and I was texting in ideas for a storybook. And I'll be honest with you, what they came back was clever, but still needed a lot of personal touch. You could feel a little bit of the AI factor in it. So, you know, the arcane art of marketing has been irrevocably changed by the invention of AI software already in just a matter of years, very, very quickly. Hundreds of these tools have sprung up in recent years, so it can be a little bit tricky to know which of them provide the best value. As I mentioned, there's so many. So it's important to zero in on what you want your AI marketing tool to achieve. So let's start. I'm going to identify a few artificial intelligence that might be useful for you guys. But first of all, in 2022, marketing was all about data, as I understand, information on your computers, marketing trends, and what your customers and potential customers are saying about your product. There's a lot of information out there, but it's hard to manually source. So AI makes this process much simpler and convenient and less time consuming. It does it quickly, at scale, all those types of things. So techniques including sentiment analysis can be used to aggregate positive and critical product reviews, competitive intelligence against rival brands. You can improve your ROI or your marketing campaigns with better targeting, SEO optimizations, which is search engine optimizations, writing creative copy, using photo tools to create posts for Instagram, Facebook, what have you, a number of things. The list goes on and on and on. So just off the top of my head, you know, things that I have dabbled with, you know, Jasper AI, which is really good for copywriting for your websites. If you really want to enhance the content for search engine optimization and content writing, Surfer SEO is very, very good. Writer.com, content writing for teams. Grammarly, I think, was the one that I use for the storybook that I did with my daughter, which is great for content editing. Albert AI, I think I used one time for digital advertising. So there's a number of creative things that you can use. And all you need to do is do a simple Google search and you can find a lot of AI tools that you can use. And it's fun to just kind of dabble with them to see what they are, see if they're important, but understand what your needs are. You can go down a pretty deep black hole and looking at all these AI marketing tools and what it could be used for, but obviously focus on the ones where there's most need for it to get some project done that you might have to get done. So it's a lot of fun. It's an interesting invention at this standpoint, and there's a lot to be said. So, given the many benefits that AI can provide, specifically in the areas of scalability, reach, efficiency, cost savings, decision-making, analytic power, the better customer experience, your web experience, and more. So it's clear that we are still only at the dawn of AI technology. I mean, we really are. I mean, there's no consolidated area to get multiple of these tools. They're all over the place. I mean, just go to a website, you can see how AI is very much in the early stages. And some of these AIs are not heavily marketed, like you would see website designers like Wix or anything like that. So a lot of this is by word of mouth. So marketers have more exciting tools at their fingertips than ever before, allowing the tiniest startup or small, like clubs, even individual players and teams as well can leverage this to compete for overall brand awareness and success in reaching your target market. So, some of the tools that I have mentioned are free. Some of them require some upgrades at the end of the day. But again, be open-minded, give it a try, and see what you can play around with. So that's just a little bit about AI. At the end of the day, I highly encourage you to use. If you want to reach out to me and for a specific AI recommendation, I'd be happy to give you one. So don't hesitate to email me. And maybe future episodes, I'll drop an AI program that I've been using in the past that has seemed to be proven successful for myself. So that's a little bit. So thanks, guys, everyone. Enjoy. Bye. That was a great episode. What is the one thing you learned from today's conversation? If this episode had an impact on you in some way, then I encourage you to visit and subscribe to our website at OutsideTheBoards.com for more episodes and interviews with incredible guests. Thanks for stopping by, my friends, and hope to see you on the polo field.